Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey friend, the world is better because of you. You see what happens when you join the Ethics Experts. You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. So hit that subscribe button and join us as we change the world by fixing our workplaces. I am here with the man, Dan Christmas. Dan is the VP and Chief Compliance Officer for Corning Inc. He's been there for almost 20 years. He has a really interesting remit. He covers, the global program, employment law, data privacy, and a bunch of other stuff. He's got a wealth of experience. He's an EthicsVerse alum, so you know that if somebody's been on the EthicsVerse and then they get invited on to the Ethics Experts, you got a treat in store for you. How's it going, Dan?
It's great, Nick. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, it's great to chat with you again.
Yeah, man. So summertime in upstate New York, you get that for a little window. How have you been spending your summer so far?
Yeah, the kids are out of school and are home. The heat has arrived, so I've been hanging out with the family, swimming in the pool. Got a trip coming up to the beach that I have to look forward to. And
Sweet.
In between that, fitting in a whole bunch of work, trying to keep Corning's compliance program on track, but it's been great.
So tell us a little bit about Corning, for those of us who are not familiar with it. Tell me about the organization itself, what kind of industries you guys play in, and what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen change over the 17 years that you've been there?
Yeah, Corning's an interesting company, right? It's the kind of thing when I meet people and I say I work for Corning, inevitably the first thing they say is, the cookware, the Corningware that my grandmother had in the kitchen, which is, it's a great icebreaker, which is true. That's one of Corning's iconic products. It's actually a business we divested in the 1990s. But Corning's been around for 170 something years, right? So it started as a glass company here in upstate New York and have kind of constantly reinvented itself. Most recently, I would say our main business lines, we're a glass and material science company. So world's largest manufacturer of optical fiber and cable. We make all sorts of specialized glasses for display applications. We make special cover glass that goes on smart devices, iPhones and the like, as well as a whole host of other businesses. The company is we're Fortune 500 company, about $15 billion in revenue, about 50,000 employees around the world. So it's from a sort of a client compliance perspective, have a whole host of the sort of typical issues that you have to deal with a global manufacturing company. We've had a growing and expanding presence in areas of the world that are higher risk from a compliance perspective, needing to make sure we're staying on track of our anti-corruption risk, our antitrust risk. One of the things is, I'd say Corning has been going through kind of a generational change. So we tend to have a long tenured workforce, and a lot of that workforce is reaching the retirement age or has reached it and is kind of moving on. So we have a large segment of our employee population who are new to the company, less than 5 years experience. And so one of the things that I've been focused on as CCO is trying to instill in those folks, we think very highly of, sort of unique Corning culture. And we have 7 corporate values, which, we talk about in our internal communications and talk about following all 7 all around the world all the time. Right. And so kind of making sure that all of these newcomers really absorb that culture and continue to kind of embody it has been a unique challenge. I think I'm sure other companies have had the same sort of issue, but those demographic changes are something that I think we've had to look at and make sure that we're keeping on top of, from a culture perspective. So that's one example of something that, has been a challenge, but I think we're doing a pretty good job at it.
So, a couple of the reasons I was excited to get you on is because a lot of the challenges, or like a lot of the things that you experience at Corning, I think are kind of unique, but there's a lot of really good lessons that anybody in a different industry can, learn from and borrow from and, maybe start to implement. And I think, 2 things that really jump out to me in the story that you just told is this constant reinvention thing. That's a very interesting muscle that a lot of organizations don't even have to develop. You know what I'm saying? Like there's some organizations that are just, obviously everybody's innovating and changing and stuff, but like the level of reinvention that Corning has sort of exhibited throughout its life is really, I don't know if it's second to none, but it's like very unique. So that's one. And then the generational shift, I think that's happening across all organizations, right? We have this new workforce of millennials and Gen Zs that maybe have different values and so forth. But I think what's particularly unique in your organization is that you guys have had maybe a disproportionate like level of, at least historically, like these long tenured employees. So the impact of these new folks coming in can be kind of stark because you have these sort of like foundational, like, sort of cultural pillars in this like long tenured workforce who, they probably have heard the 7 values 1,000 times at this point, right? Now you have this new contingent coming in that maybe doesn't know those at that level. As I sort of generally think every opportunity has maybe an equal and opposite threat, and I think can be viewed maybe at its base level, the threat of these new folks coming in. Is our culture going to, disintegrate, or is it going to change in a meaningful way? Maybe, hopefully not negatively.
Sure.
How have you, but I mean, the way you talk about it, it sounds like you see the opportunity in indoctrinating these people. Again, I know that that's kind of like a negative term, but the technical like definition of that is what we're talking about. We want to bring these people into the fold, get them sort of drinking the Kool-Aid. Again, maybe another bad example, but we want these to be Corning people that live those 7 values every single day in every single way, So how have you, like, what have you learned in trying, and like, as this new wave has come in, how have you learned, or like, what have you learned about like actualizing them and really kind of bringing them in an authentic way, not just sort of hammering them over the head or like allowing these natural divisions that can happen between generations to occur in your company?
Yeah. No, it's a great observations, Nick. I would say, I think and I'm no sort of social scientist, right? But I do think, and others would probably perceive this, that each generation kind of wants to absorb information in its own way, communicate in its own way. We have folks coming into the workforce who have been, who are much more used to, operating through all sorts of various means of communication, et cetera. So we've done a couple of things, I think, to try to bring them into the fold and without, just hammering them over the head. One of the things, and I think this is a useful example for even for folks in other industries, we've had, we've been very proud of our code of conduct, and like all big companies, we had a long and detailed sort of code of conduct but it was, quite frankly, stale in the sense that it was, a text heavy, non-interactive document. And despite the fact that we would train new employees on this, we were able to look and, we could sort of see what kind of hits we're getting on our intranet site, where it's located, how much people are utilizing it. And it was just, it's not the kind of thing you'd sit down and consult if you had an actual question about something, right? When you're used to interacting with information in an electronic format, it was more for the days of a printed out document that you had on your desk. Right. So a couple of years ago, we went through a code of conduct refresh project with a vendor, and although a significant amount of work, we did internally, and really made a much more engaging, kind of user-friendly document. And, some of it is style, like, photographs and images, just making it more something that you'd be interested in looking at. Some of it is substance in terms of embedding in it links to policies or Q&As, or, we produced a document that I think ultimately is much more user-friendly, and is the kind of thing that if I'm a new employee and I have a question, I might actually go look at, find the answer I'm looking for, right? So that was one way of trying to kind of meet our new employees where they are and help them to learn and absorb our culture. Another thing we did was looked at how we receive reports from, our facilities around the world. Like all sort of large companies, we have a third party, reporting service. We typically call it our hotline, although most things come over the web these days. But we recognized we weren't necessarily, we had a lot of employees that don't sit at a computer all day. Right. They're working in a manufacturing facility. They're a technician of some sort. And so we rolled out a mobile reporting option where employees can, utilizing a smartphone, a QR code, scan that, and then report a concern directly into the compliance office. So, small things, but ways that we were trying to engage with and reach out to newer employees, help them to understand, how much we value them contributing to our culture and how much we want them to speak up and raise concerns if they do have them. And the statistics I think have supported. If we were looking at our case rates over the last year or so as we've implemented those things, we're seeing more reports. And we always felt like maybe there were things that weren't getting reported for one reason or another, and now we're seeing them come in, which I think is a positive. So a couple of examples that I think really worked well for us, and that others may want to try to utilize if they're having the same sorts of issues.
Yeah, and I think those are great examples, and there's probably 100 others that you could kind of share. But what I was struck with as you were describing these things was, you're not starting from scratch, right? You had this base document that you could leverage, and you could take the sort of best pieces from, and you could change the style, and you could put it into a web format that was a lot more interactive and stuff like that. You weren't starting from a blank canvas. And on the the reporting side, what a small tweak to put that QR code. Obviously, it's an ecosystem, and there's a bunch of interaction points that cause the confluence of which end up causing that increase in reports that you're talking about. But how simple, right? A little QR code to let people interact with your office in a different way. Have you figured out, well, maybe not figured out, but as you look toward like us getting more sort of tech focused, or as more, the workforce sort of shifts even more toward, millennials and Gen Zs, what do you think the sort of next frontier of like, ethical impact or sort of compliance impact is going to be? And now we're just kind of navel gazing. We're just kind of looking into crystal balls. But like, where do you see it going, and what do you think our next like needle mover is going to be?
Yeah, it's a great question, as you said. It's kind of having to just theorize or hypothesize, but I think we're going to continue to see this intersection, which is already happening, but of kind of the traditional compliance program stuff, that we're all familiar with, the code of conduct and training and policies, with the whole world of ESG and sort of governance and sustainability. I mean, that I think the Gen Zs and the millennials are more interested in understanding that their company is not only stable financially and doing good in the world in that sense, but also stands for something, right? And there's arguments, right? I don't want to, we could spend an hour kind of arguing stakeholder capitalism and all that sort of thing. But what I think it means is that we will see more intersection of those kinds of concerns, and you see companies being more proactive in terms of speaking out on social justice issues, and employees kind of expecting that from companies in terms of taking positions, and so I think compliance will start to mean more than the traditional. It is already starting to mean more than kind of the classic traditional elements, but also, the ethical piece. Like, where does your company and your program stand on ethical issues, and how do you, again, kind of meet the expectations of the individuals? When people look at companies, it's not just a matter of maybe where I'm going to go make the most money, but it's going to be a matter of what does the culture stand for? What does the company stand for? How can I feel good about working there? And so I think that's a real, point in the future that we're really going to have to deal with and try to proactively address to continue to retain the great employees we want to retain and to have the culture we want to have.
So this for the listeners, this was not planned. We did not coordinate this, but that's kind of what my answer is too, because it can be kind of overwhelming. But at the other, if you look at it the other way, to your point, we can spend all day debating shareholder capitalism versus stakeholder capitalism, and we can spend all day talking, having that sort of political debate. But at the end of the day, the employees that are coming into our workforce now, or the employees that are in our workforce now, care more about ethical things. They want to work at a culture, or they want to work in a company that's doing good and doing well, right? They want to work at a place where they can be proud, they can be proud of their email address, right? And it's not, and what I think a lot of people don't see is that this group is willing to be active participants in it. They're not just trying to sit back and watch a baseball game. They want to be on the field, and they're willing to do it. And so there is this tension with this generation where they want these things, but they've probably had some bad experiences. Like probably everybody in your company, or probably most people in your company, it's not their first job. They've worked somewhere else, and they've been a little bit jaded, and they've seen the sort of greenwashing that's out there, which again creates a massive opportunity for organizations that can recognize, okay, there are people coming in my organization. They care about all the things I've been banging the table about for the last 10 years. They care about ethical culture and cultures of integrity and, doing the right things and making an impact and pursuing a mission that is, resonant with their internal purpose. We can take advantage of that very easily by showing them as they come into the organization that this is a different kind of a place. And I think, people like you who are running programs that see this, as you just said, are going to be in a much different position or in a much better position to take advantage of this opportunity than those who are either being overwhelmed by it or who have some kind of aversion to the ESG thing. Like, again, there's a lot of debates about the ESG thing, but like the average person is not in those debates. They're not looking at, fund composition and how investors are making, ESG decisions. It's sort of part of the zeitgeist right now. It's sort of part of, it's just kind of, it's sort of in the air. And they are looking for those things, regardless of what the moniker is or what the, the initials for the movement are. They're looking for those things. And that's a great group of people to actualize. We can turn those people on and they can really start to become these, these culture champions and these sort of guardians of the integrity of the organization. And as active participants, starting to crowdsource that risk intelligence so that we can stamp out those fires before they, turn into blazing infernos.
Yeah, I think that's well said, right? And I think Corning has always, as part of our culture, cared deeply about not, of course, our employees, but the communities that we're in. We, as a sort of old school manufacturing company, tended to have manufacturing plants in small towns in America. Now a lot of that manufacturing has moved, it continued to grow around the world, but particularly here where I'm at our corporate headquarters in Corning, New York, which is a small town in upstate New York, we have a really great partnership in terms of our support of the United Way, the local schools, all, you name it, all sorts of instances where the company genuinely wants to make an impact in the community. And I think employees see that and appreciate it. I think, the key is putting your, kind of money and your actions where your mouth is, right? And companies, it's not enough to just sort of say we do these things or to kind of, have the marketing lingo around doing these things, but actually doing them, because it becomes pretty evident when you're just sort of walking the walk, talking the talk, but not walking the walk, right? To use a whole bunch of idioms here. And I think Corning also has a sort of unique, one of the things about our culture, and I've only, prior to working at Corning, I worked at a large law firm. So this is the only sort of company that I've been a part of. So I can't compare it with other cultures, but we have always prided ourselves internally on a very kind of open door, consensus building culture. And what that means is we'll get employees who will, send an email right to the CEO and say, I've got a concern about this or that. So there's a lot of internal communication that takes place. And so I think what we've seen is these, the kind of general change, the newer employees are willing to raise their voice and want to be heard. And so you've got to be prepared to respond to that. And again, you have to really sort of do what you say you're going to do. And in doing that, I think you gain a lot of credibility. And as you said, those folks want to be right there with you, supporting those efforts. And so it's just kind of giving them the opportunity to do that. Yeah,
it's just closing the loop and, kind of honoring those efforts from folks, right?
Yeah.
And saying, hey, your voice does matter, and that's evidenced by my response even, that can even do it. I want to talk a little bit about that other muscle that your company has really gotten great at building. And you, I presume, have gotten good at building that as well, since you've been there for so long, and this reinvention thing. And I'm sure you've grown through acquisition, and I'm sure the footprint of Corning, now compared to like when you started is way bigger.
It is.
I'd love to hear about what the journey, I want to hear your full journey because there's so many lessons in it, but like, I'd love to kind of start with the Corning journey. Like, what was it like when you landed in Corning? Now you have 50,000, employees. I think you said $15 billion. Like, where was it then? So just so we can kind of get a sense of like how the scale has changed. And then I'd love to kind of walk through your path at Corning and how your responsibilities have changed and, what some of these muscles you've built have been.
Yeah. So I came to Corning in 2007, and at that time the company was basically about half the size it is now, both in terms of employees and revenue. And was not as diversified in terms of our revenue across business units. And so at the time, Corning actually has a really, again, it's probably too much for the time we have, but Corning has an interesting history in that the company almost went bankrupt in the .com, bust of 2001. Yeah. So Corning, as I said, invented optical fiber, which is, the pipelines of the internet, right? Like all of our interaction right now is going, it's everything travels across it. And so in the late 90s, 2000, as the internet was just exploding, Corning kind of doubled down on the optical fiber business and expanded in that space. I think no one anticipated kind of the collapse that would ensue in terms of the .com bust. But we got, over our skis there, and then and had to shrink significantly and our stock went from, I'm ballparking it, but in the hundreds of dollars to like $1. Wow. Right. And thankfully the company did not go bankrupt, and we found, and through that kind of muscle of innovation, we had an expanding display glass business that happened to sort of align with the whole conversion from the old boxy CRT televisions to the flat screen television. So the world needed a whole lot of this flat display glass. And so that really helped Corning grow, and that business expanded. But what that has meant is our management, our corporate management has, kind of learned some lessons from that near-death experience, as we describe it. And so we try to maintain a very balanced, revenue stream across our businesses, and also, a portfolio of financial health that will ensure that we don't have a similar instance like that. So, I mean, that's kind of the Corning I came into in 2007. And then we have grown substantially since then, both through acquisition and just organic growth. I think we have, looked to kind of augment our existing businesses with sort of ancillary or complementary businesses. But that growth has been, around the world. And that's one of the things from a compliance perspective is, as I said earlier, like growing in our presence in China has really grown. And that's a critical region for Corning, growth in the Middle East, growth in South America, places that presented new and different compliance risks is something we've had to kind of deal with. But we maintain a large internal research and development function, and so we're constantly trying to innovate and develop new products to make sure that we stay on the cutting edge of what our customers need across the technologies that we work in.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating to me, kind of how a company, I love business and I love kind of how companies work, and to have that near-death experience and for that lesson to be learned, and then to say, hey, we have to kind of diversify our portfolio of revenue, and then to take those actions and then to see that and ride that wave is pretty cool. When you're doing, when your company's expanding into other regions, I'd love to just kind of dive into one of those moments where you're expanding into China or you're expanding into, I don't know, Brazil or something, and you were just like, okay, what the heck? And then you had to kind of dive in and get smart really quick. Tell me a little bit about maybe a couple of anecdotes there, please.
Yeah, so Brazil was the one that was coming to mind, because we acquired a large company in Brazil. It goes back maybe 6 or 8 years to help grow our manufacturing footprint there in our telecommunications business. We wanted to be able to manufacture locally and sell to customers via those facilities. So, we went through the whole kind of corporate due diligence process, trying to make sure that we paid attention to compliance issues as part of that. But, the business kind of considerations really drive those interactions. And so, boom, we now own this asset and all these people in Brazil. And as you said, we have to just kind of dive in and figure out how we're going to make sure we integrate them. And some of it is just like the basics, we had to translate our code of conduct into Portuguese and make sure that it was available to the employees. We had to make sure our training was available, in local language. Being part of the integration plan. So one of the things we did, which I think is good, is we made sure that compliance had a seat at the table, in terms of integration planning. And we're able to say, day 0, here's what we think we need to do. Day 90, here's what we think we need to do. And then future, like, here's where we want to be from a compliance perspective. And so we were able to voice those opinions, and we were supported in making sure that training. We had one of our, wasn't me personally, but one of our lawyers was able to go and do compliance training, right off the bat with the leadership in Brazil, and made sure we were kind of setting the tone from the get-go. And I think that's an important part of it is welcoming, new employees into the kind of corporate family, helping them understand what we stand for, and, rolling out to them all the kind of tools of our compliance program so that they can absorb those. But then also, and recognizing, so we've acquired companies with varying degrees of, the smaller companies are bound to have less of a sort of compliance structure than a company like Corning is going to have. And so you have to quickly ascertain, well, where might there be gaps, right? Where might we have to fill some holes and improve some practices? And that's, another whole exercise we quickly put ourselves to try to make sure that we were on top of things and, avoided any issues as we integrated them into our Corning family.
What do you think your compliance program has learned? Because you guys have done, dozens of acquisitions probably over your time there. It sounds, and I'm not surprised by this given, what your culture is like, but you've had a seat at the table. You've been able to be part of these integration conversations. Have there been any learnings like over that time in terms of how your department interacts with the other parties that are part of the acquisition team or part of the integration team? Have there been sort of different like risk lenses that you apply based on size or region or something that allow you to be, viewed as a good business person, but also, satisfy your own sort of like risk mitigation appetite?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that's true, right? Depending on the size of the acquisition, where it's taking place, there is a sort of risk lens that we've applied and said, okay, what do we had, for example, we had one business we acquired that was in some regulated technologies, dealing with glass used in shielding against, X-ray and sort of potential nuclear rays as part of, Department of Energy facilities. So, we had to quickly ascertain the whole world of that regulatory landscape and make sure we were clear on that, right? So, like, there's always those. That's a unique. Happen often, but something where we had to quickly come up the learning curve there and recognize the particular risk. Otherwise, I would say it's based upon and geography. I think what has helped at times and what we've looked at is, do we have existing Corning facilities that are in the region, right? That we can sort of pull the new folks into, not literally, but have them be part of that network. It has helped to have resources available and on the ground, right? As opposed to trying to just sort of do everything from headquarters and just dictate things, but to actually show you care enough to have a person there and be involved in the integration, which, can be hard depending on resources, but that's something I think has been helpful in getting actual uptake from people, as opposed to, them thinking it's just more sort of from corporate and it going one ear and out the other.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest challenges with, I think, roles like this is really that like materiality thing, because the lowest risk thing is to do everything, right? To kind of smash the nail with a sledgehammer or something. But what we actually have to do is take this sort of risk-based approach, and you can't do everything because of org size, because you don't have time, because you don't have capital, whatever it is, or you just don't have like capacity, right? Because in like compliance stuff is not the only stuff to do to integrate. There's 1,000 other sort of aspects of the business that need to. And that, that borrowing from other scenarios, kind of like reaching back into the way back machine, so to speak, and, kind of pulling those lessons forward probably gives you at least a framework that you can apply in a number of different situations and not fall into this trap. And maybe this is a good sort of transition to my next question, but, one of the reasons I was excited to have you on is because, you're kind of this next gen compliance professional. You're in a complex business. It's international. You're kind of, I don't want to say whack-a-mole, but like there's new stuff coming at you all the time and you have to be very agile. There's a lot of other folks, sort of the average, view of our role in most companies is, you've heard all the obnoxious things, Office of No and all of that. So like if somebody is maybe new to an organization and they sort of stepped into a stereotype that they didn't really contribute to, but they have a vision to, grow their program into something that's more agile like yours, more part of the business, seat at the table, stuff like that. What advice would you give that person to really affect change quickly? Because kind of time is of the essence,
Yeah, it's a great question. And I agree, I've certainly heard all the, it's like a double whammy being a lawyer and a compliance officer, because you not only get the lawyer jokes, you get the compliance officer jokes, right? But, my point of view is you just simply can't be an effective either in-house lawyer or compliance officer if you're just sitting there with your no stamp, like, shutting things down.
Right.
And so, but of course, you're going to have table stakes, which is we comply with the law. Right. And what you realize is it's just typically there's gray that then starts to develop once you've met those table stakes in terms of the level of risk that an organization is willing to take on. A couple of things that come to mind. One of the things that I've tried to do that I think has been helpful is developing personal relationships with our business and our functional leaders. So I meet with the general managers to talk to them about what our compliance program is doing, to hear from them about their concerns, questions, et cetera, and to kind of make them advocates for, to amplify the messages that we're promulgating from our office. And I think that helps with them understanding that we're not here to simply shut things down, but we're trying to be a strategic enabler of what they want to do. And that's come up in we have a business division that works in aerospace and defense. And so, regulated under different, export control laws and things. And so we've had in some instances to explain, look, we can't do something maybe the way you want to do it, but let's try to find other ways that are compliant and maybe not your top choice, but to help try to achieve your business objectives. That's always my approach we've got baseline expectations around complying with the law. And of course we have our own internal values and ethics at Corning, but then are there ways that we can accomplish the business objectives, that we can support that and help you, maintain compliance as we do it. And I think when you do that, when you communicate with leaders and their staffs, when you make it clear that you want to understand their priorities and build that relationship, it goes a long way in helping them not see compliance as just this kind of external impediment to what they're trying to do. So that's one thing we've been really focused on, and I think it has paid dividends in terms of trying to, be seen as a strategic enabler as opposed to a roadblock.
Yeah, and it humanizes you, and it's not this sort of faceless, department that's just, as you called it, an impediment, but it's a bunch of human beings that are willing to collaborate, and we're all wearing the same jersey and stuff like that. How have you helped other people on your team that are below you kind of sing that same song and, have those same kind of conversations with maybe other counterparts? Like, how do you help make sure that you're not the only, person trying to make these connections with the organization?
Great point. So, right. And I didn't really get into it earlier, but we do have obviously I've got a great team that they deserve the actual credit for what we're able to accomplish in terms of our compliance program. But, a group sort of at our headquarters corporate level that helps with programmatic elements, but then a larger kind of expanded group who are in our regions around the world, who are Corning lawyers and part of our law function, but also have been kind of tapped and said, you also have a particular responsibility for compliance in this given region/country. And so that's my, broader, they don't report to me directly. They have a dotted line reporting relationship into me, but work very closely with them. We, regular communications, one-on-ones, team meetings, which I think helps with setting the tone amongst our group and helping everybody feel, as part of the team. And then what they are doing in their respective regions is kind of modeling, what I just described, is they're building relationships with those regional business leaders. They're, making sure they have a seat at the table when it comes to kind of strategic planning for the business. They're they're making sure they're seen as someone that can help achieve goals as simply versus being, a sort of impediment to what the business wants to do. So we're trying to model that, and to the extent I can, I'm advocating for them at a higher level, and then they're building those connections. It's like it's sort of like the building of the synapses in the brain, right? You're making these connections,
right?
And I think it's really important because it's inevitable at some point something bad's going to happen. Like we're going to have some kind of an issue. We're going to hear from a regulator, and it's not at that point. You're really behind the curve if that's when you first start to interact with folks.
Right.
So we're trying to avoid that for sure.
Yeah, there's no doctors that are hated more than those who like emergency heart surgeons or something. You know what I'm saying? Or like the trainer you have to go to because your doctor demands it. Excuse me. But yeah, I love that example, or I love that analogy of the brain synapses, because in a sort of perfect world, we have this sort of collective hive mind that's united and sort of congruent in terms of like what matters, what doesn't matter, and those communication lines are open and almost instant. And I mean, you can't do that unless you're doing what you're talking about. You have a sort of distributed network of sort of like-minded folks who are focused on the right things, trying to make those connections at that local level.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And then in terms of the program itself, what we've tried to do is recognize that there's this sort of constant tension between like a corporate, centralized, strong corporate-led program where things are dictated versus a very decentralized, regional-led program where it may fit better with the region likes that flexibility, but you have less of control and oversight from a centralized perspective. And so we're trying to find the Goldilocks spot here to meet the right, level of centralized support. For example, a global anti-corruption policy, but then recognizing that you might have region-specific gift and entertainment limits that are different from another region because of cultural practices, et cetera. So, you're setting kind of overall standards, but also allowing for some region-specific, I don't want to say, deviation's not the right word, but, allowing some customization. And I think by doing that, we're not sort of setting our folks up to fail, right, who are then implementing these things in the regions. And the other thing I would say is, consistent with all the guidance from the Department of Justice, and you alluded to this earlier, Nick, but the whole idea of kind of, it's whack-a-mole, things coming from different directions. And so how do you assess the risk, and what are the priorities? So we've implemented a risk assessment process that helps us determine, okay, we can't do all things in all places. And so how do we prioritize, and where are we focused? And then directing our resources in support of that is another way of helping those local, elements do the job that they need to do.
Is the risk assessment framework and tool sort of like set, and then you can just apply it across these different regions, and that's going to give you a different prioritization? Or is it sort of a customized risk assessment for each region at some level?
Yeah, it's a set. So it's we did work with an external partner and utilize a tool that they have developed. But what it does is it allows us as a company to say, these are the risks we sort of are primarily concerned about.
Right.
But then it is something you distribute to, a group that you select, and they respond based on their own perception of risk level, either both the inherent risk and then also to what degree the risk has been mitigated through our existing controls. And so it gives you kind of a centralized overall corporate picture, but then we can also slice and dice it to see region-specific, business-specific.
How cool
as
is
what
that?
they perceive. Yeah, it was a really useful tool, and I'm excited to continue to do that year over year and see how the trends develop and how it supports kind of then us driving our plans and objectives for the coming year.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much insight that you can probably gather from that thing, and it can probably inform so much prioritization and make sure you're not like wasting your time on stuff, which is,
Exactly.
Again, I mean, it's it's such a critical resource, time is, it's like we have to get stuff moving, but also we can't waste time doing things that aren't going to move the needle, and it's hard to know on the front end.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, everybody in corporate America or, in work today, I think we all have more on our plate than we can do in a given day. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast. And so it's a matter of prioritizing and figuring out, what requires attention now, but then not losing sight of. And I also find there's this kind of constant need to find balance between putting out today's fires, but not losing sight of like the strategic objectives that you have in mind and how you're trying to, in terms of kind of one of the key challenges I see as a CCO, it's making sure that I'm not losing sight of the strategic element and giving enough time to that, just because, the issues of the day demand your attention. And so, it's a struggle everyone has, but I think that's an important thing to try to manage in order to be a successful CCO.
Yeah. I think you have to be conscious of that dynamic. Otherwise you're just going to be, continuing to work on those urgent, important things when many times those, non-urgent, important things are the things that are really going to give you that stepwise increase in efficacy or, risk reduction or whatever,
Exactly. Right. So, you try to strike that balance. And I think, it's interesting. I mean, from a personality standpoint, to be someone who is okay with unexpected things occurring, right? And sort of shifting gears. Mm-hmm. You can't be inflexible in how you respond to things, and you have to accept some uncertainty, which is not always, some people struggle with that. But that's a personality trait I think you have to develop in order to kind of help run a compliance program in today's world.
Yeah, that flexibility and that sort of eye toward materiality, or kind of that thing you just called a personality trait. Where do you think that was developed in you? Have you just always been that way? Did you learn some lessons on your path to where you're at that really kind of helped solidify those in you? Is it just a constant process? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, I think personally, and probably like a lot of lawyers, I'm probably more intrinsically prone to order, control things a certain way. And then you recognize, I think, as you start to develop yourself professionally, that's if you are too rigid in that approach, it's going to be to your detriment, because you have to be flexible enough. And particularly when I came to Corning, came in-house from a law firm environment where it's funny, it didn't feel like my workload was just as busy, but it was busy in a different way, right? The pace is very fast in an global in-house environment. I'm managing time zones across the world, and you just have to, I think you just develop that trait naturally because you recognize it's something you have to do to be successful, and you have to be able to, kind of manage competing priorities and be able to, shift from one to the other. And so, through just kind of practicing it, but also recognizing it's important and working on it, I'd say that's how I've tried to do and I've not mastered it, but that's been my effort.
Yeah. Man, we're getting close to the end here, and I feel like this should have been a double episode because I have a bunch more questions, so maybe we can have you back at some point. But
maybe a sequel.
We'll have to do a sequel. I love a good sequel. What I always like to ask this question, though, if you can go back in time to a young Dan and give him some piece of advice, and maybe that's right after you got out of undergrad or right as you got out of law school or something, what is a piece of advice that you wish you had earlier that would have maybe broadened your impact sooner?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. It's a great question. Of course, everybody's kind of path is a little bit different. So, but I think, maybe what, young Dan had a sort of trajectory in his mind as to, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. I'm going to and so in law school, for example, I didn't take a lot of classes that, or participate in clinics that might have fit better with like the in-house environment I'm in now, because I figured, like probably most, first year law students, you take a kind of litigation heavy curriculum and you think you're going to be a lawyer in court someday, right? And then you and of course, lawyers go off to do a million different things, including compliance, which is a great expanding field to work in. And you don't have to be a lawyer to be in it. But I think for me, maybe having recognizing there's a lot of uncertainty in the future, kind of trying to not be as rigid in my thinking as to my path and opening myself up to other options along the way to develop those, mental muscles.
Yeah.
And then is probably the thing that comes to mind. It's a tough question. But
it's a tough question.
Hopefully that answer makes sense.
No, it does make sense. And I think this is just something I've sort of put together, and maybe I'm dead wrong about it. But that's a really challenging thing to do, right? Especially for a lot of lawyers I've spoken to, they've wanted to be lawyers since they were kids. And so they have that sort of pretty dialed in path,
exactly.
Right? And so sticking to this sort of clear picture of where I'm going served them really well because they did well in high school, and then they did well in college because they had that vision of getting into law school. And I think, I'll just speak for myself. I knew I wanted to go into accounting and finance. I had no idea the breadth of there's 1,000, it's kind of a similar thing. There's 1,000 different careers in accounting and finance and stuff like that. And I just didn't even know about any of them when I was in undergrad.
That's I think that's a good example. That's kind of what I was articulating, right? And I'm, like you said, I'm probably one of those people that from a kid, and my mother used to tell, I would argue a lot, debate with her. And she used to say, you'd make a good lawyer someday.
I got a couple of those at home myself. Yeah.
But you start to develop this vision for yourself. And I get, it's one of these, it's difficult because it's the sort of wisdom or perspective you gain looking backward that you don't necessarily have when you're looking forward. But that would be my advice. And I do, I have the opportunity to talk with, I do some alumni interviewing for my undergrad, or, if I have the opportunity to talk to law students, I just always remind them the idea of not trying to be too myopic in your vision, but allowing yourself to consider. And I think, we see that in today's world, particularly people are going to have a range of different jobs over a course of a career. You have all sorts of new industries that are developing. And, so this idea of flexibility and of allowing yourself to see different options, I think that's something that will serve, people well as they kind of make their careers in today's world.
Yeah. But to your point, it's very tough to balance, right? Because you need that sort of clarity of vision in order to become the thing you want to be. And it's hard to kind of also say, I'm also going to explore sort of a bunch of different rivulets from this stream that I'm in, because who knows, they might resonate with me. It's a tough thing, Well, listen, man, it's so great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Check out the Ethics First episode with Dan, where we were talking about, I think we were talking about reporting effectively to the board, right? Yeah, that was a freaking great episode.
Thanks.
Yeah,
My pleasure, Nick.
So thanks for joining us. We will see you next time. That was awesome, man. I knew it.
Okay?
Yeah, I knew it.
Okay?